Bath, England, 1815. The grand ballroom of Westmoreland House glittered with candlelight, illuminating the cream of Bath society as they whirled across the polished floor. Yet in a secluded alcove, partially hidden by heavy velvet curtains, Miss Ada Primrose stood frozen, her gloved hands clasped tightly together as she faced the most powerful man in the county. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," Ada managed, certain she had misheard the tall, imposing figure before her. The Duke of Harrington, Andrew Percy, regarded her with the same detached expression he wore when discussing the weather or crop rotations. His steely grey eyes betrayed no emotion, his posture remained impeccable, and his voice maintained its measured cadence as he repeated his proposition. "I said, Miss Primrose, that you should marry me, immediately." He adjusted his pristine cravat. "The rumours circulating about your impropriety are gaining momentum by the hour, as are certain whispers connecting my name to yours." Ada's cheeks flushed with indignation. "Those rumours are entirely unfounded. I merely helped Mr. Wilson when he fell from his horse. There was nothing inappropriate about offering a handkerchief to a bleeding man." "Indeed." The Duke's expression remained unmoved. "However, you were unchaperoned, and Mr. Wilson is a notorious flirt. Society has drawn its conclusions." "Let them talk," Ada replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "I've never concerned myself with their opinions before." A shadow of something, perhaps admiration, flickered across the Duke's face before disappearing. "A commendable attitude, but impractical. Your father's recent passing has left you vulnerable. Without protection, these rumours will destroy any prospect of a respectable future." Ada swallowed hard. Her father, a respected scholar, had died just 3 months prior, leaving her with a modest inheritance and a small cottage on the outskirts of Bath. At 23, she was precariously balanced on the edge of spinsterhood, a fate that had never troubled her until this moment. "Why would you offer marriage, Your Grace? We are hardly acquainted." The Duke clasped his hands behind his back. "We share mutual connections through your late father. I respected his work immensely. Moreover, I find myself in need of a duchess. My estate requires an heir, and I require a wife above reproach." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Marry me, Miss Primrose, or face ruin. I offer protection, comfort, and position. You need not love me. Indeed, I expect nothing of the sort. This is a practical arrangement to benefit us both." Ada stared at him. This man she knew only by reputation, wealthy, powerful, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. The notorious Ice Duke of Harrington, whose perfect manners and absolute propriety were matched only by his apparent inability to smile. "You speak of marriage as though discussing a business transaction," she said softly. "Is it not?" he countered, one eyebrow arched. "I find emotion clouds judgment. Better to approach such matters with clarity." Ada turned away, gazing at the dancers spinning in carefree circles. Her reputation had never mattered to her before, but suddenly the weight of society's judgment felt crushing. Without family protection, these rumors could leave her completely isolated. "I would require certain freedoms," she said finally, turning back to face him. "Clarify." "I would continue my charitable work. I would maintain correspondence with my friends, and I would—" She hesitated. "I would have access to your kitchens." This, at last, seemed to surprise him. "My kitchens?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "I enjoy cooking, not as a servant but as a pastime." For a moment the Duke appeared genuinely perplexed. "You wish to cook for pleasure?" "Indeed." He considered this oddity, then nodded curtly. "Very well. You shall have access to the kitchens provided you do not interfere with the staff's duties. Do we have an agreement?" Ada looked into his cold, handsome face and made her decision. "Yes, Your Grace. I accept your proposal." "Excellent." He offered his arm. "We shall announce our engagement immediately and marry within the fortnight. The situation calls for expediency." As he led her back into the ballroom, Ada wondered what she had just committed to. Marriage to a man who approached life with the emotional range of a marble statue. A future as the Duchess of Harrington, bound to a husband who saw their union as nothing more than a sensible business arrangement. What she could not possibly know was how completely this practical decision would transform them both. The following morning, Ada sat in her small drawing room, penning a letter to her closest friend, Charlotte Hayward. Her hand trembled slightly as she attempted to explain her sudden engagement. Dearest Charlotte, you will think me mad when you read what I'm about to write, but I implore you to reserve judgment until I have explained fully. I am to be married in a fortnight to the Duke of Harrington. Yes, that Duke of Harrington, the one they call the Ice Duke, whose propriety and coldness are legendary throughout Bath. You will wonder how this came to be, as our paths have seldom crossed in society. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her writing. Mrs. Winters, her housekeeper and sole remaining servant, appeared with wide eyes and flustered demeanour. Miss, there's a carriage, the grandest I've ever seen, with the Harrington crest on the door, and footmen in livery. 4 of them. Ada hastily folded her incomplete letter. The Duke is here already. Not the Duke, miss. A woman. Says she's Lady Eleanor Percy, the Duke's sister. Ada's heart raced as she smoothed her simple morning dress, hardly appropriate for receiving nobility. But before she could suggest any delay, a commanding female voice called from the entrance hall. Miss Primrose, I hope I'm not intruding at too early an hour. Ada entered the hall to find a striking woman in her 30s, elegantly attired in a travelling ensemble of deep burgundy. Her resemblance to the Duke was unmistakable. The same aristocratic features, the same penetrating grey eyes, though hers held warmth her brother's lacked. Lady Eleanor, what an unexpected pleasure! Ada curtsied, acutely aware of her modest surroundings. The woman assessed her openly, then smiled, a genuine kind smile that immediately set Ada more at ease. My brother informed me of your engagement last night. I confess, I was startled enough to drive from London immediately. I had to meet the woman who managed to secure a proposal from Andrew. Ada blinked, unsure whether to be flattered or insulted. Would you care for tea, Lady Eleanor? Eleanor, please. And yes, tea would be lovely. We have much to discuss. In the small parlour, over steaming cups of Darjeeling, Eleanor Percy revealed herself to be refreshingly direct. I should tell you that my brother has rejected no fewer than 12 eligible young ladies in the past 5 years. The ton had all but given up on him ever marrying. So you can imagine my shock when his note arrived announcing his engagement to a young lady I'd never heard him mention. Ada set her cup down carefully. I suspect the circumstances are rather unique. Indeed. Eleanor's shrewd gaze took in Ada's simple furnishings, her father's books lining the walls, the ink-stained fingers that betrayed her scholarly habits. Andrew mentioned your father was Professor Primrose, the historian. Yes, Ada replied, surprised. Did His Grace know my father? They corresponded extensively about medieval agricultural practices, I believe. Andrew seldom discusses his scholarly interests, but I noticed your father's volumes in his study. Eleanor paused. May I speak frankly, Miss Primrose? Please. My brother is complicated. Our father was a cold, demanding man who valued control above all else. Andrew learned early that showing emotion was a weakness to be exploited. When our mother died, he was just 11. I watched him retreat further behind walls of propriety and duty. Ada listened, fascinated by this glimpse into the Duke's past. He is not unkind, Eleanor continued. Indeed, he is scrupulously fair to his tenants and generous with his wealth, but he has never learned to express warmth. I feared he would live and die alone in that enormous house, surrounded by servants who fear him and peers who respect but do not love him. She leaned forward. Until now. Lady Eleanor, I don't know what drew him to you, Miss Primrose, but I can guess. You're different from the simpering debutantes who have pursued him. You have substance, intelligence, perhaps even the courage to challenge him. Ada thought of their conversation in the alcove, how she had negotiated terms rather than gratefully accepting his proposal. Perhaps, Eleanor smiled. Good. He needs that. She set her cup aside. Now, practical matters. The wedding will be at Harrington Hall, naturally. You'll need a trousseau befitting a duchess. I've taken the liberty of arranging appointments with the finest modistes in Bath this afternoon. That's extremely kind, but I couldn't possibly... Nonsense, consider it my wedding gift. Andrew has given me carte blanche for your expenses. Eleanor's tone brooked no argument. We leave in an hour. I suggest you wear your walking boots. We have much to accomplish. By sunset, Ada's head spun from a whirlwind day of fittings, fabric selections, and purchases that cost more than her annual income. Eleanor proved both exacting and generous, insisting on silks and satins Ada would never have chosen for herself. "A duchess cannot dress like a country miss," Eleanor declared, when Ada protested the extravagance. "These trappings are part of the role you've accepted." As they parted that evening, Eleanor embraced her impulsively. "I believe you may be exactly what my brother needs, Ada Primrose, though whether he knows it yet is another matter entirely." Ada returned home exhausted, but with a clearer understanding of the world she was about to enter, and the man she was about to marry. The Ice Duke, it seemed, had not always been frozen, which meant, perhaps, there was hope he might thaw. The following days passed in a blur of preparations. The Duke called daily, though his visits were brief and formal, discussing settlements, reviewing the marriage contracts his solicitors had prepared, and providing updates on the wedding arrangements. He never touched her, never attempted any familiarity beyond the most proper conversational topics. Yet Ada noticed small, telling details, how he listened attentively when she spoke, how his eyes followed her movements, how he had remembered her preference for Earl Grey tea, and ensured it was served when she visited Harrington House in Bath to review the household accounts with his steward. On the eve of their wedding, he presented her with a velvet box containing a magnificent sapphire and diamond ring, the Harrington betrothal ring, worn by duchesses for generations. "It should have been given earlier," he said stiffly. "My apologies for the oversight." As he slipped it onto her finger, their hands touched. Ada felt a jolt of awareness, and for just a moment his eyes met hers with an intensity that belied his cool demeanor. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It suits you." His voice sounded different, lower, less controlled. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back, resuming his proper distance. "I shall see you tomorrow at the church, Miss Primrose." He bowed formally and departed, leaving Ada staring at the glittering ring, a symbol of a union she still couldn't quite believe she had agreed to. A marriage of convenience to a man who seemed incapable of passion, yet something in his eyes just now had suggested depths she had not yet glimpsed. Tomorrow she would become a duchess. The thought was terrifying, and yet, as she gazed at the sapphire on her finger, as blue as the Duke's family crest, Ada felt a curious flicker of hope. Perhaps there was more to the Ice Duke than met the eye, and perhaps she would be the one to discover it. The first weeks at Harrington Hall passed in a blur of introductions, instructions, and adjustments. The Duke's ancestral home, a magnificent stone mansion surrounded by rolling countryside, housed 50 servants and contained 93 rooms, all of which seemed to operate according to rules Ada had yet to master. Their wedding had been a quiet affair, attended only by necessary witnesses and conducted with the efficiency the Duke applied to all matters. He had been perfectly courteous, perfectly proper, and perfectly distant. Now, as the new Duchess of Harrington, Ada found herself adrift in a sea of formality. Her husband spent his days attending to estate business, emerging only for dinner, during which he discussed politics, agriculture, or estate matters, with polite detachment, before retiring to his study. They occupied separate bedchambers, connected by a sitting room neither used. The marriage remained unconsummated, a detail that both relieved and strangely disappointed Ada. The Duke had made no attempt to claim his husbandly rights, treating her instead with the same cool respect he might show a distant relation. Mrs. Fairchild, the housekeeper, who had served the Harrington family for 30 years, approached Ada on her third morning with a formidable ledger. "The household accounts and schedules, Your Grace," she said, her tone suggesting Ada would find them incomprehensible. His Grace's mother always reviewed them weekly. The previous Duke was most particular about order. Ada accepted the book with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Fairchild. I'll study them carefully." "Of course, Your Grace." The housekeeper hesitated. "If I might be so bold, there are certain traditions at Harrington Hall. His Grace values them highly. I'm eager to learn them." Mrs. Fairchild's stern expression softened slightly. "The Duchess's parlour hasn't been used in years, not since the Dowager Duchess passed. Perhaps you might wish to make it your own. It has excellent light for reading or needlework." Ada recognized the gesture for what it was, a tentative olive branch from the intimidating housekeeper. "I'd like that very much. Would you show me?" The Duchess's parlour proved to be a lovely room overlooking the rose garden, with windows that caught the morning light. Dust sheets covered the furniture, and the air smelled stale from disuse. "It needs a good airing," Mrs. Fairchild admitted. But it was always a cheerful room. As servants removed the sheets and opened windows, Ada discovered an elegant writing desk, comfortable chairs, and shelves that once held books, now empty. "What happened to the books?" she asked. Mrs. Fairchild's expression clouded. "The late Duchess, His Grace's mother, was fond of novels. After her passing, His Grace had them removed. He considered them frivolous." An interesting insight into her husband, Ada thought. Did he associate novels with the mother he'd lost? Or did he truly find fiction without value? "I shall have to bring my own collection from storage," Ada decided. Perhaps some history volumes might join them? A ghost of approval flickered across Mrs. Fairchild's face. His Grace does value scholarly pursuits. That afternoon, Ada sent instructions for her modest library to be delivered from Bath. While organizing her new sanctuary, she discovered a small door partially hidden behind a tapestry. It opened onto a narrow staircase. "Ah, yes," Mrs. Fairchild explained when questioned. "The Duchess's passage. It leads directly to the kitchens. The late Duchess sometimes liked to observe the cooking." Ada's heart leapt. "How convenient. I shall make use of it, I think." The housekeeper looked startled. "For what purpose, Your Grace?" "Did His Grace not mention? I enjoy cooking myself." As a pastime. Mrs. Fairchild's expression suggested Ada had announced an intention to take up sword-swallowing. "Cook? But Your Grace, that's not... That is to say, a duchess doesn't..." "His Grace has granted permission," Ada said firmly. "I shall, of course, ensure I don't interfere with the staff's duties." On this particular morning, 3 weeks after her wedding, Ada rose before dawn. Unable to sleep and tired of staring at the ornate ceiling of her bedchamber, she decided to venture to the one place in this massive house that called to her, the kitchens. She dressed simply, choosing a plain morning gown and securing her chestnut hair in a loose knot. The servants would not begin their day for another hour, the perfect opportunity to explore the domain she had been too shy to claim. The kitchens at Harrington Hall occupied the entire eastern wing of the lower floor, a vast cathedral of culinary artistry with gleaming copper pots, enormous hearths, and a pantry larger than her former cottage. Ada stood in the doorway, breathing in the lingering sense of yesterday's meals and the promise of today's possibilities. Moving with quiet purpose, she gathered ingredients: flour, butter, sugar, apples, and cinnamon. Baking had always soothed her spirits, a therapeutic ritual learned at her mother's side before illness claimed her a decade ago. Soon, Ada was lost in the familiar rhythm, measuring, mixing, rolling dough with practiced hands. She hummed softly, dusting the countertop with flour as she prepared to shape her apple pastries. So absorbed was she in her task that she failed to notice the tall figure who appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace!" Ada jumped, sending a small cloud of flour into the air. She turned to find the Duke watching her, his expression inscrutable. He wore riding clothes, suggesting he had risen early for exercise. "Your Grace!" She cursed inwardly at the flour now dusting her gown. "I did not expect anyone to be awake at this hour." He stepped into the kitchen, his gaze moving from her flour-smudged cheek to the neatly arranged pastries waiting to be baked. "I typically ride at dawn," he explained, moving closer to examine her work. "What exactly are you creating?" "Apple tarts with cinnamon and a touch of nutmeg," she replied, fighting the urge to wipe her hands nervously on her apron. "My mother's recipe." The Duke picked up a small piece of raw dough, studying it as if it were a curious artifact. "You truly enjoy this labor?" "It isn't labor when done for pleasure," Ada replied, gaining confidence. "Do you not find satisfaction in activities beyond duty, Your Grace?" He considered this question with surprising seriousness. "I ride for pleasure. I read scientific journals. I find both mentally stimulating." "But nothing that engages the senses?" Ada asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. To her astonishment, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I appreciate fine brandy," he offered, "though I suspect that's not what you meant." Ada returned to her work, sliding the tray of pastries into the oven. "Would you care to stay and taste them when they're ready? It won't be long." She expected refusal, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I have time before my steward arrives." They sat in awkward silence at the kitchen's sturdy wooden table as the sweet aroma of baking pastry filled the air. When Ada finally retrieved the golden brown tarts and placed one before him on a simple plate, The Duke regarded it with the serious attention he might give a complex legal document. He took a careful bite, then another. His eyes widened slightly. "This is," he began, then paused, seeming to search for the appropriate word. "Exceptional." Ada beamed with genuine pleasure. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Andrew," he said suddenly. "When we are alone, you might call me Andrew." It was the first personal concession he had offered since their marriage, and Ada recognized its significance. "Then you must call me Ada." He nodded, finishing the tart with more enthusiasm than she had seen him display for anything. "What else do you make, Ada?" "Everything," she admitted. "Breads, cakes, puddings, biscuits. My mother taught me from childhood, and I've collected recipes ever since." "Fascinating," he murmured, and for the first time Ada thought she detected genuine interest in his eyes. "I would not have guessed the daughter of Professor Primrose would develop such practical skills." Ada smiled, relaxing slightly. "My father nurtured my mind. My mother nurtured my heart. She believed a complete education included both intellectual and domestic arts." Andrew nodded thoughtfully. A wise philosophy. He rose abruptly, consulting his pocket watch. "I must attend to business, but this was pleasant." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Perhaps you might continue your culinary activities, if it pleases you." It wasn't until he had gone that Ada realized what had happened. For the first time since their marriage, they had shared a genuine conversation, and more surprisingly, the Duke had actually enjoyed something. The kitchen encounter marked a subtle shift in their relationship. The Duke began joining Ada for breakfast, a meal he had previously taken alone in his study. He spoke little, reading correspondence as he ate, but occasionally asked her plans for the day or commented on estate matters. Ada found herself looking forward to these quiet mornings, observing her husband when he was absorbed in his letters. Without the mask of formal politeness, his face revealed more. Concentration furrowing his brow, occasional irritation tightening his jaw, rare satisfaction softening his features. She began to read his moods, to understand when to speak and when silence was preferred. A week after their kitchen encounter, Ada was startled when Andrew entered the breakfast room with a small package. "This arrived from London," he said, placing it beside her plate. "I thought you might find it of interest." Ada unwrapped the parcel to find a slim volume, a collection of recipes from a renowned French chef. "This is wonderful," she said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." He nodded once, returning to his newspaper without further comment. Yet Ada noticed the way his eyes flickered above the page to observe her pleasure. It was, she realized, the first gift he had given her beyond the obligatory wedding ring and family jewels. That same afternoon, an unexpected carriage arrived bearing Lady Eleanor, who swept into the house with her usual energy. "Ada, darling," she embraced her sister-in-law warmly. "How are you finding life as a duchess? Is my brother being unbearably stiff? The house overwhelming? The servants intimidating?" She lowered her voice. "Mrs. Fairchild nearly terrified me to death when I first came here as a girl." Ada laughed, grateful for Eleanor's presence. "Everything is adjusting. Mrs. Fairchild and I have reached an understanding, I believe." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Impressive, it took me years." She glanced around the entrance hall. "Where is my dear brother?" "Visiting tenants on the north property. He's not expected back until dinner." "Perfect." Eleanor linked her arm through Ada's. "We can speak freely. Show me what you've done with the Duchess's parlour." As they settled in Ada's newly refurbished sanctuary, Eleanor observed the changes with approval. "You've brought life back to this room. My mother would have been pleased." Ada offered tea, which Eleanor accepted with a conspiratorial smile. "Now tell me everything. How fares your marriage?" The directness of the question caught Ada off guard. "It's, proceeding." "That sounds utterly thrilling," Eleanor said dryly. "Has Andrew thawed even slightly, or is he still playing the perfect aristocratic statue?" Ada hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He's been considerate. And we had a pleasant conversation recently about cooking, of all things." Eleanor's eyes widened. "A conversation? About something other than estate matters or politics? Heavens, Ada, you're working miracles already." Ada couldn't help smiling. It was hardly a miracle, but he did seem genuinely interested. "That's more than most have achieved," Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully. You know, he was quite different as a boy. Before our mother died, he laughed easily, played games. Was dreadfully mischievous, in fact. Once released all the frogs from the pond into the morning room before a visit from our particularly disliked aunt. Ada tried to imagine the austere Duke as a playful child and found it difficult. What changed him so completely? Eleanor's expression sobered. Our father. After Mother died, he became obsessed with molding Andrew into the perfect heir. Emotions are weakness, he would say. A duke commands respect, not affection. He sent Andrew to a brutally strict school, where showing feeling meant inviting torment. By the time he returned, the laughing boy was gone. She set her cup down with a decisive click. But enough melancholy. I've come to invite you both to a small gathering at my husband's country estate next week. Fresh air, pleasant company, perhaps even a little music and dancing. Ada hesitated. I'm not sure His Grace would leave Andrew to me. Eleanor waved away her concern. He cannot refuse his only sister, especially when the invitation includes several influential political allies he's been cultivating. When Andrew returned that evening, he found his wife and sister deep in conversation in the drawing room, heads bent over a book of fashion plates. Eleanor, he said, a hint of genuine warmth in his voice. This is unexpected. The best visits always are, his sister replied, rising to embrace him. I've been keeping your lovely wife company and extending an invitation you cannot possibly refuse. Over dinner, Eleanor outlined her proposed house party with such enthusiasm and strategic reference to potential political advantages that Andrew found himself agreeing before he fully realized what he had done. When she departed the following morning, Ada marveled at her sister-in-law's skillful manipulation. She's rather formidable, Ada commented as they watched Eleanor's carriage disappear down the drive. Since childhood, Andrew agreed, and Ada was startled to see the ghost of a smile touch his lips. She could always outmaneuver me. The week before the house party passed quickly. Ada spent time in the kitchens each morning, and to her surprise Andrew began appearing with increasing regularity, ostensibly to discuss household matters, but remaining to watch her work and occasionally taste her creations. On the third such morning, he arrived as she was preparing a batch of lemon curd. Is that for the tarts you mentioned yesterday? He asked, settling into what had become his customary chair near the work table. Yes, Ada replied, pleased he had remembered. My mother's special recipe. The secret is a touch of honey to balance the tartness. Andrew watched as she stirred the mixture over gentle heat. My grandmother made preserves, he said suddenly. Blackberry usually. She'd stain her fingers purple every August. Ada looked up, surprised by this personal recollection. Did she teach you to make them? No, he replied, his expression distant. It wasn't considered appropriate for a future duke to engage in such activities. But I was allowed to watch sometimes. He seemed to catch himself sharing this memory and straightened. The estate accounts for the East properties require review. I should attend to them. He departed abruptly, leaving Ada wondering at the brief glimpse into his childhood and why he had cut the conversation short so suddenly. It was as if he had surprised himself with the personal disclosure and retreated behind his wall of formality. The next morning, she decided to try blackberry preserves. When Andrew appeared and saw the dark berries simmering on the stove, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps even pleasure. Those smell exactly as I remember, he said quietly, accepting a spoonful to taste. Is the flavor correct? Ada asked. He nodded slowly. Precisely as my grandmother's. For a moment his guard seemed completely lowered, and Ada glimpsed the man beneath the duke, a man with memories, preferences, perhaps even longings. Would you like me to make these regularly? She offered. For your breakfast? He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Surprise mingled with something deeper. I would. Thank you. It was a small victory, but significant. Ada had found something that pleased him, something that perhaps connected him to happier times, and in his thanks there had been genuine warmth. The journey to Eleanor's estate took place on a glorious autumn day. Seated beside her husband in the grand ducal carriage, Ada watched the countryside slide past in a tapestry of gold, crimson, and bronze. They spoke little, but the silence felt less strained than in previous weeks. As they approached a particularly beautiful vista, with rolling hills stretching to a distant river, Ada gasped softly at the beauty. "The view pleases you?" Andrew asked, observing her reaction. "It's magnificent," she replied honestly. "I've always loved autumn landscapes. The colors, the quality of light. My father used to say nature puts on her finest dress before winter's sleep." Andrew nodded. "This valley is particularly striking in October. I often ride here when visiting Eleanor." "You must show me your favorite routes," Ada said without thinking, then wondered if she had presumed too much. But Andrew surprised her. "I would be happy to. Tomorrow morning, perhaps, if the weather holds." Ada turned to him, unable to hide her pleasure. "I'd like that very much." For a brief moment, something unguarded and almost warm passed between them, not quite a connection, but the possibility of one. Then the carriage turned into the long drive leading to Northbrook Manor, and the moment passed. Eleanor greeted them with her usual exuberance, embracing Ada and even managing to extract a brief hug from her resistant brother. "You're the last to arrive," she exclaimed. "Everyone's already gathered for tea in the garden. Come, I'll introduce you." As they moved toward the rear of the house, Andrew placed a hand lightly on Ada's elbow, the first time he had touched her since their wedding. "The gathering is larger than Eleanor implied," he murmured. "Are you prepared?" The question surprised her, both his awareness of her potential discomfort and his concern. "I believe so," she replied, "though I'm grateful for the warning. Stay near if you feel overwhelmed," he said quietly. Eleanor's enthusiasm sometimes blinds her to others' comfort. It was the most considerate thing he had yet said to her, and Ada felt a warm spark of appreciation. "Thank you. I shall." The garden party proved to be a lively affair with 20 guests, most of whom regarded Ada with undisguised curiosity. The new Duchess of Harrington, a virtual unknown in society circles, was an object of intense interest. "Bath, did you say?" inquired Lady Hensley, a matron with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. "I wasn't aware the Duke had connections there. Your father was a professor. How unusual." Ada recognized the subtle disdain, but maintained her composure. "Yes, my father held the chair of medieval history at Oxford before his retirement. His work on agricultural practices of the 14th century is still considered definitive." Before Lady Hensley could respond, Andrew appeared at Ada's side. "My wife's father was a distinguished scholar," he said, his tone brooking no argument. His correspondence on historical land management proved invaluable when modernizing Harrington's farming methods. The implied rebuke silenced Lady Hensley, who quickly found reason to speak with another guest. Ada glanced at her husband, surprised by his defense. "Thank you," she said softly, as they moved toward the refreshment table. "Lady Hensley delights in finding perceived weaknesses," he replied. "Your background is not one." It was not quite a compliment, but Ada felt warmed nonetheless. Throughout the evening, she noticed Andrew remained more attentive than usual, appearing at her side during difficult conversations and ensuring she was introduced to the more agreeable guests. Later, as musicians played and couples danced on the terrace, Ada stood watching the revelry when Andrew approached. "Would you care to dance?" he asked formally. Startled, she nodded. "Yes, thank you." As he led her into a country dance, Ada realized this was the first time they had danced together. Even at their wedding, there had been no celebration, no music, no moments of shared joy. Andrew proved to be an excellent dancer, his movements precise, yet graceful. As they circled each other following the pattern of the dance, Ada caught glimpses of a different man, one less rigid, more attuned to music and movement. "You dance very well," she observed during a pause in the pattern. "My mother insisted," he replied, surprising her again with a personal detail. "She said a gentleman who danced poorly would never win a lady's heart." "Wise advice," Ada said, smiling. For a moment, brief but unmistakable, his eyes softened, and his lips curved into what might almost be called a smile. Indeed. The evening ended with Ada feeling more hopeful about her marriage than at any time since their wedding. Small changes, certainly, but significant ones. The Ice Duke, it seemed, might not be completely frozen after all. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Andrew would happen to appear in the kitchens during Ada's baking sessions, initially offering the excuse of estate business, bringing him to that wing of the house. Soon these pretexts grew thinner until eventually he simply arrived, pulled up a chair and watched her work. Ada discovered that her taciturn husband became surprisingly talkative in the warm, fragrant kitchen environment. He asked questions about her techniques, offered observations about the quality of ingredients from various estate farms, and occasionally shared anecdotes from his childhood. "My grandmother baked," he admitted one morning as Ada prepared lemon curd tarts. "Not often. It wasn't considered proper for a duchess. But sometimes after my mother died, she would dismiss the staff and make simple honey cakes with me." Ada looked up from her work, touched by this rare personal disclosure. "You must have been very close." "She raised me," Andrew replied, his voice softening. "My father was occupied with estate matters and his position in Parliament." Ada sensed there was more to this story, but didn't press. Instead, she offered him a spoonful of lemon curd to taste. "Too tart?" she asked as he sampled it. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perfect." Later that week, Ada found a package in her chambers, a collection of handwritten recipes from France, Italy, and Spain, bound in leather with a simple note, "For your collection, A." It was the first gift he had given her beyond her wedding ring, and Ada was oddly moved by its thoughtfulness. As autumn deepened into winter, other changes manifested. Their dinner conversations expanded beyond estate matters to literature, philosophy, and politics, where Ada discovered, to her delight, that the Duke respected her opinions even when they differed from his own. Gradually, he began inviting her to ride with him in the mornings, showing her the extent of his lands with obvious pride. The transformation in Andrew himself was subtle, but unmistakable. The servants whispered about it, how the Duke now occasionally smiled, how his voice had lost some of its crisp formality, how he had been overheard humming in his study. One particularly cold December morning, Ada entered the breakfast room to find Andrew already seated, a letter open before him. "Good morning," she greeted him, accepting a cup of tea from the footman. Andrew looked up, his expression troubled. "My cousin William has taken ill. Influenza, possibly pneumonia." Ada immediately recalled meeting the jovial William at Eleanor's house party. "I'm very sorry to hear it. Is it serious?" "His physician is concerned." Andrew folded the letter carefully. "He has no immediate family. I should visit him." "Of course," Ada agreed. "When will you leave?" "This afternoon, if the weather permits. I shall return as soon as his condition stabilizes." He hesitated. "Unless, would you care to accompany me? He's at his hunting lodge near Cirencester. The journey is not arduous." The invitation surprised Ada. Until now, Andrew had kept their lives largely separate, never suggesting she accompany him on business or personal matters. "I would be happy to come," she said carefully, "if you think my presence would be helpful." "William always enjoyed feminine company," Andrew said, "and the journey would be less tedious with conversation." Not the most romantic of invitations, Ada thought wryly, but progress nonetheless. "Then I shall accompany you. I'll instruct Matthews to pack immediately." The journey to Cirencester took them through increasingly wintry landscape, the first snow of the season dusting the hills like powdered sugar. In the enclosed carriage, warmed by hot bricks and thick blankets, Ada found herself sitting closer to Andrew than ever before. "Have you known your cousin long?" she asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Since childhood. William, Eleanor, and I spent summers together at our grandmother's estate in Somerset." A faint smile touched his lips. "William was always in trouble, climbing trees too high, swimming in forbidden ponds, liberating pies from the kitchen before they were ready." "He sounds delightful," Ada said, enjoying this glimpse into a happier time in her husband's life. "He was. Is," Andrew corrected himself. "Though our paths diverged in adulthood, we've maintained contact. He's one of the few people who—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Who what?" Ada prompted gently. Andrew sighed. "Who knew me before I became as I am now." The admission hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement, however oblique, that he recognized the change in himself over the years, that the cold, formal Duke was not who he had always been. "People change," Ada offered. "Circumstances shape us." "Indeed." He gazed out at the snow-dusted landscape. "Though sometimes I wonder if the boy I was would recognize the man I've become." It was the most revealing thing he had ever said to her, and Ada felt a surge of empathy. She reached out impulsively and placed her hand over his, where it rested on the seat between them. Perhaps he would be proud of your accomplishments, if not your happiness. Andrew looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm upward, intertwining their fingers, the first intimate touch he had initiated since their marriage. Perhaps, he said quietly, the latter might still be possible. They remained that way, hands joined, for the remainder of the journey. William's hunting lodge proved to be a comfortable stone house nestled among snow-laden pines. They were greeted by a worried housekeeper who led them immediately to the sick room. William Percy lay propped against pillows, his normally ruddy face pale and drawn, but his eyes brightened at the sight of his visitors. Andrew, and the lovely new Duchess. What a wonderful surprise! His voice was hoarse, but his spirit seemed intact. You look terrible, Andrew said bluntly, but Ada noticed the concern in his eyes as he approached the bedside. William laughed weakly. Always the flatterer, cousin. He turned his attention to Ada. Has he been treating you well, Your Grace? If not, I'm available as soon as this inconvenient illness passes. Behave yourself, Andrew admonished, but without heat. Ada smiled, immediately liking the invalid. His Grace has been most considerate, and please call me Ada. Ada, William repeated. A lovely name for a lovely lady. Far too good for my dour cousin. Agreed, Andrew said unexpectedly, drawing surprised glances from both Ada and William. Now what does your physician say? They stayed for 4 days while William's condition improved. Ada discovered a new side to her husband as he sat with his cousin, playing chess, reading aloud from the newspaper, and occasionally sharing reminiscences that revealed a childhood far warmer than she had imagined. On their 3rd evening, after William had fallen asleep, Ada and Andrew sat before the fire in the lodge's cozy sitting room. Snow fell heavily outside, creating a sense of intimate isolation. Thank you for coming, Andrew said, passing her a glass of wine. Your presence has cheered him considerably. I've enjoyed it, Ada replied truthfully. He's wonderful company, even ill, and I've learned much about you from his stories. Andrew grimaced. Most exaggerated, I assure you. I don't believe that for a moment, Ada teased gently. The tale about you falling into the duck pond while attempting to retrieve your grandmother's hat was far too specific to be invented. To her delight, Andrew laughed, a genuine warm sound she had never heard from him before. That, unfortunately, is entirely true, though he neglected to mention it was his idea to use a fishing pole rather than simply wading in. They fell into easy conversation, the most relaxed they had ever shared. The wine, the crackling fire, and the isolation created by the snowfall all contributed to a sense of intimacy that had been lacking in their marriage. May I ask you something personal? Ada ventured, after a comfortable lull. Andrew tensed slightly but nodded. You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. She gathered her courage. Why did you really marry me? The rumors were unpleasant, but hardly ruinous. There must have been dozens of more suitable candidates for a duchess. He studied his wineglass, turning it slowly between his fingers. I told you that I respected your father. Yes, but that hardly seems sufficient reason to propose marriage. Andrew was silent for so long that Ada thought he might refuse to answer. Finally he spoke. I had observed you, before our meeting at Westmoreland House, at various gatherings, though we were never properly introduced. You were different. Different? Ada prompted. You spoke your mind. You discussed ideas rather than gossip. You showed kindness to those society overlooked. He set his glass down carefully. And you smiled, genuinely smiled, not the practiced simper of debutantes seeking advantage. Ada felt her cheeks warm. You noticed all that? I notice everything, he said simply. When the rumors began, I saw an opportunity, not just to secure a suitable duchess, but to... He hesitated. To perhaps find a companion who would not find me entirely intolerable. The admission was so honest, so unexpectedly vulnerable, that Ada felt a surge of tenderness. And have I? Found you intolerable, that is. His eyes met hers, unusually open. You would know that better than I. I find you many things, Andrew, she said softly. Complicated, intelligent, often frustrating, but never intolerable. The air between them seemed to change, charged with possibility. Andrew set his glass aside and moved to sit beside her on the small settee. And what else do you find me? He asked, his voice lower than usual. Ada's heart quickened. Surprising, she admitted. Increasingly so. His hand reached up to touch her cheek, a tentative, gentle touch that sent warmth cascading through her. I find myself similarly surprised, he murmured, by feelings I had not expected to experience. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. A kiss so light it was barely a touch, yet it sent a jolt of awareness through Ada's entire body. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, for he kissed her again, more firmly this time. Ada responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, both breathing more quickly, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "This is not what I planned," he confessed. "This attachment." "Plans change," Ada whispered, her heart full of a new, tender hope. "Sometimes for the better." He smiled then, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his features and made Ada realize just how handsome her husband truly was. "Indeed, they do." They returned to Harrington Hall 2 days later, William safely recovered, and the relationship between husband and wife irrevocably changed. That night, for the first time, Andrew came to Ada's bedchamber, and their marriage was consummated with a tenderness and passion that belied their formal beginnings. In the weeks that followed, winter settled over the countryside, but within the walls of Harrington Hall, a profound thaw continued. The Duke and Duchess now took regular meals together, rode side by side in the mornings when weather permitted, and spent evenings in the library, reading aloud or discussing the day's events. Andrew began joining Ada in the kitchens, not just to observe, but to participate, clumsily at first, then with increasing confidence. The first time he successfully folded beaten egg whites into a chocolate soufflé mixture, his expression of concentration followed by triumph made Ada laugh with delight. "What's amusing?" he asked, looking up from his careful work. "You," she replied fondly, "the mighty Duke of Harrington, conqueror of soufflé." He smiled, something he did more frequently now. "A more daunting opponent than most members of Parliament, I assure you." The household staff watched these developments with varying degrees of shock, approval, and, in Mrs. Fairchild's case, grudging acceptance. The Duke had always been fair but distant. Now he occasionally complimented a well-prepared meal or inquired after a footman's ailing mother. Small changes, but significant ones. One evening in December, as snow fell silently outside the drawing-room windows, Ada played the pianoforte while Andrew sat nearby, ostensibly reading correspondence but actually watching her fingers dance across the keys. When she finished the sonata, he set his papers aside. "You play beautifully," he said. "Thank you." Ada smoothed her skirts, suddenly self-conscious under his intent gaze. "My father insisted on proper musical education, though I fear I was never as dedicated a student as he hoped." Andrew moved to sit beside her on the bench, taking her hand in his. "Would you teach me?" he asked, surprising her. "I never learned." "Of course." She positioned his hands on the keys, guiding his fingers to play a simple scale. As they sat together at the instrument, shoulders touching, hands occasionally overlapping, Ada marveled at the transformation in their relationship. The cold, distant man who had proposed marriage as a business transaction now sought her company, shared her interests, and looked at her with undisguised affection. That night, as they lay entwined in the darkness of their now shared bedchamber, Andrew traced gentle patterns on Ada's bare shoulder. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about us, about the nature of our arrangement." Ada tensed slightly, uncertain where this was leading. "Yes?" He shifted to look directly into her eyes, his expression unusually vulnerable. "When I proposed our marriage, I spoke of convenience, practicality. I believed such things were the only solid foundation for a union." "I remember," Ada said softly. "I was wrong." His voice dropped to a whisper. "What has grown between us is neither practical nor convenient. It is something else entirely." Ada's heart quickened. "And what is that, Andrew?" He hesitated, struggling visibly with words that didn't come easily to him. I believe it may be love." The admission, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Ada's eyes. "I believe you may be right," she whispered back, reaching up to touch his face. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I never expected this, he confessed. To feel so much. For so long I thought it safer not to feel at all. And now, Ada prompted gently, now I find that feeling, even when it renders one vulnerable, has its compensations. He pulled her closer. You have changed me, Ada. Awakened parts of myself I thought long dead. She smiled through her tears. Perhaps they were merely dormant, waiting for spring. Perhaps, he agreed, kissing her tenderly, though it took a rather exceptional gardener to coax them back to life. Their kiss deepened, conversation giving way to more intimate expressions of the love neither had expected to find in their practical arrangement. The following morning, Ada woke to find Andrew propped on one elbow, watching her with undisguised tenderness. "Good morning," she murmured, still drowsy. "Indeed it is." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I have been thinking. A dangerous pastime so early," she teased. He smiled. "Perhaps, but I've made a decision nonetheless." He took her hand in his. "I wish to host a Christmas gathering here at Harrington Hall, Eleanor and her husband William, perhaps a few others, a proper celebration." Ada sat up, surprised. "You hate entertaining." "I did," he admitted. "But I find I want to share my happiness. Our happiness. The house has been silent for too long." Touched beyond words, Ada threw her arms around him. "I think it's a wonderful idea." "There's more," he said, once she had settled back against the pillows. "I want to renew our vows. Not legally, we are of course already married, but differently. With words I should have said the first time." Ada's eyes filled with tears again. "Andrew, I offered you a transaction," he said seriously. "You deserve a declaration." And so on Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and the great hall of Harrington decorated with evergreens and candles, the Duke and Duchess of Harrington stood before their closest friends and renewed the promises made months earlier, this time not as a business arrangement, but as a covenant of love. "Ada," Andrew said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, "when I asked for your hand, I spoke of practical matters, protection, position, respectability. I offered you a transaction when I should have offered my heart." He took both her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "Today, I make new vows. I promise not merely to provide for you, but to cherish you. Not just to respect you, but to delight in you. To share not only my name and home, but my thoughts, my hopes, my dreams." His voice softened. "I promise to be not just a husband-in-law, but a partner in life. To love you with all that I am, and all that I have yet to become." Tears spilled freely down Ada's cheeks as she responded. "Andrew, when I accepted your proposal, I thought I was agreeing to a life of dutiful companionship. Instead, I discovered a man of depth and feeling behind the formal facade. A man capable of great tenderness and unexpected joy." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to continue discovering you, every day of our lives together. To remind you of the boy you were and celebrate the man you are. To fill our home with warmth and laughter and, yes, the occasional soufflé." This drew chuckles from their guests. "Most of all, I promise to love you, not despite your complexities, but because of them." As Andrew bent to kiss her, sealing their renewed vows, Eleanor dabbed at her eyes and whispered to William, "I never thought I'd see it. My brother, utterly besotted." William grinned. And all it took was a woman brave enough to make him taste life again, one pastry at a time. Later that night, after their guests had retired and the house grew quiet, Andrew and Ada stood together by the library fire, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they gazed at the flames. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she sighed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I confess, I have one more Christmas gift for you." "Oh?" He turned her gently to face him. "You've already given me more than I deserve." Ada took his hand and placed it on her stomach, watching his face as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" he whispered, eyes wide with wonder. She nodded, smiling through fresh tears. "The physician confirmed it yesterday. By next summer, Harrington Hall will have a new occupant." Andrew gathered her carefully into his arms, burying his face in her neck. When he finally pulled back, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never imagined such happiness," he confessed. "When I proposed our arrangement, I thought at best we might achieve comfortable coexistence. Instead, You've given me everything. As have you, Ada replied softly. My cold, practical duke who learned to love after all. He kissed her then, pouring all his newfound emotion into the embrace. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Harrington Hall in pristine white, a fitting symbol for the fresh beginning they had found together. Spring arrived at Harrington Hall, transforming the grey landscape into a riot of colour. Daffodils carpeted the meadows, cherry blossoms dusted the orchards with pink snow, and within the ancient stone walls, an equally remarkable transformation continued. The Duke's household staff still whispered about the changes in their master, how he smiled openly now, how he sought the Duchess's company at every opportunity, how they had heard laughter, actual laughter, coming from his study when she visited him there. Most scandalous of all, the Duke and Duchess now shared a bedchamber, a development that had the housekeeper pursing her lips in disapproval while privately delighting in her master's obvious happiness. On this particular morning, Ada woke to find Andrew already dressed, sitting at the edge of their bed, watching her with undisguised affection. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I've been waiting to speak with you." Ada sat up, suddenly concerned by his serious tone. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head, taking her hand in his. "Quite the opposite. I've been reflecting on our journey these past months. When I proposed our marriage, I offered you a transaction, safety and position, in exchange for respectability and an heir." Ada nodded, remembering all too well his cold, practical proposition. "I said you need not love me," he continued. "Indeed, I convinced myself that love was unnecessary in a successful marriage." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her palm. "I was utterly, completely wrong." Ada's breath caught. Though their relationship had transformed dramatically, though they now shared passionate nights and companionable days, neither had spoken explicitly of love. "Ada," he said, his voice suddenly uncertain, "I find myself in the unexpected position of being hopelessly in love with my own wife. Your kindness, your intelligence, your passion for life, they've changed me in ways I never thought possible." He slid from the bed to one knee, still holding her hand. "I know we are already married, but I wish to propose again, not as a business arrangement, not as a solution to a problem, but as a man who loves a woman with his entire heart." Tears sprang to Ada's eyes as he continued. "Will you accept me as your husband in truth? Will you build a life with me based not on convenience, but on love? Will you grant me the privilege of trying every day to be worthy of your affection?" Ada threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him backward. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. 1,000 times, yes." As her pregnancy progressed, Ada found Andrew becoming increasingly protective, sometimes frustratingly so. He insisted she rest frequently, hired additional staff to ease her responsibilities, and hovered anxiously whenever she ventured into the kitchens. "Andrew," she said with fond exasperation one afternoon, as he tried to dissuade her from a walk in the gardens, "I am with child not made of porcelain. Women have been bearing children since the beginning of time." "Not my child," he replied seriously. "Not my wife." She softened, touching his worried face. "And both will be perfectly fine. The physician says I'm in excellent health. Now will you accompany me on this walk, or must I escape on my own?" Sighing in defeat, he offered his arm. "You are the most stubborn woman in England." "Which is precisely why you love me," she retorted cheerfully. As they strolled among the spring blossoms, Andrew guided her to a stone bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "I have a surprise for you," he said once she was comfortably seated. "Another? You've already filled our nursery with enough toys and books for 10 children." He smiled sheepishly. "This is different." He hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "I hope you'll approve." Now Ada was intrigued. "Tell me." "I've been corresponding with the Royal Society. They're establishing a scholarship in your father's name for promising students of medieval history who lack financial means." Ada gasped, overcome with emotion. "Andrew, I don't know what to say." "Your father's work deserves recognition," he said simply. "And I thought our child should know the legacy of both sides of their family." Tears flowed freely down Ada's cheeks as she grasped the significance of his gesture. Not only was it a tremendous honor for her father's memory, but it represented Andrew's complete acceptance of her origins, her scholarly, non-aristocratic background that some in society still whispered about. "Thank you," she whispered, clasping his hands. "It's the most thoughtful gift imaginable." Andrew smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "There's a small ceremony planned for next month in London, if you're feeling well enough to travel, of course." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Ada assured him. As they continued their walk, Ada marveled at the changes in her husband. The man who had once approached life with cold efficiency now found joy in small pleasures, showed genuine concern for those around him, and expressed his feelings with increasing openness. Yet some habits remained deeply ingrained. He still worked tirelessly on estate matters, maintained exacting standards for himself and his household, and occasionally retreated into silence when overwhelmed. But now, instead of these moments becoming walls between them, Ada recognized them as part of who he was, and loved him for his complexities rather than despite them. One afternoon in May, as Ada rested in the Duchess's parlor, a commotion in the entrance hall drew her attention. Rising awkwardly, her pregnancy now well advanced, she made her way to the main staircase to find Andrew in heated discussion with a severe-looking older man. "This is neither the time nor the place, Father," Andrew was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. Ada froze. The Duke of Harrington's father, the Dowager Duke, had been living in Italy for years. His return was unexpected and clearly unwelcome to Andrew. "When you've been traveling for 3 weeks, any time becomes the right time," the older man replied imperiously. His gaze shifted to Ada on the staircase, eyes coldly assessing her figure. "So this is the bride about whom I've heard so much gossip. A professor's daughter, I understand. How progressive of you, Andrew." Andrew's jaw tightened dangerously. "Father, may I present my wife, Ada, Duchess of Harrington. Ada, my father, Edward Percy, the previous Duke of Harrington." Ada descended the last few stairs and curtsied as gracefully as her condition allowed. "Your Grace, welcome to Harrington Hall." The former Duke barely inclined his head. "I see the rumors of your condition are accurate. At least you've managed that duty promptly." Before Andrew could respond to this offensive remark, Ada spoke calmly. "Indeed, Your Grace. We are most fortunate. I understand congratulations are customary when a family anticipates a new member." Edward Percy's eyebrows rose at her direct response. "Forthright, isn't she?" he remarked to Andrew. "Well, I suppose that's preferable to simpering vacuity." Andrew moved to Ada's side, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "My wife is many things, Father, all of them admirable." His voice was cold but controlled. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Ada needs rest. Matthews will show you to your chambers. We can speak later." Once they were alone in Ada's parlor, Andrew began pacing, tension radiating from him. "I apologize for my father's behavior. He has always been difficult." "That's one word for it," Ada observed, settling into a comfortable chair. "Why has he returned now after so many years away?" Andrew sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had rarely seen from him. "Money, most likely. He's probably exhausted his allowance and needs additional funds. It's happened before." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I won't allow him to upset you or insult you. If necessary, I'll arrange for him to stay elsewhere." Ada squeezed his hands reassuringly. "I'm not so easily upset, Andrew, and he is your father, however unpleasant. He abandoned Eleanor and me after our mother died," Andrew said quietly. "Left us with our grandmother while he traveled Europe, drowning his sorrows in wine and gambling. He returned occasionally to criticize, instruct, and withdraw more funds, then disappear again." Understanding dawned on Ada. And each time he returned, he reinforced the lesson that emotion was weakness. Andrew nodded, his expression distant. Caring for someone meant giving them power to hurt you. He demonstrated that principle repeatedly. Ada touched his face gently, bringing his focus back to her. "Yet, here you are, caring deeply, despite all his lessons." A smile slowly replaced his frown. "Perhaps I found a better teacher." The Dowager Duke's stay proved mercifully brief. After 3 tense days during which he criticized everything from the estate management to the table settings, Andrew confronted him privately in his study. Ada, passing by, overheard fragments of their heated exchange. "Not another penny beyond your allowance." Ungrateful after all I sacrificed. What exactly did you sacrifice? Certainly not your comforts or pleasures. Your mother would be appalled by your choice of bride. Ada moved away, not wishing to eavesdrop further, but her heart ached for Andrew. Whatever his father's failings, his words still had power to wound. That evening, Edward Percy announced his intention to return to Italy. "The English climate disagrees with me," he declared over dinner, "and I find the social atmosphere equally chilly." Andrew merely nodded. "Matthews will arrange your journey." The following morning, as the former Duke's carriage disappeared down the drive, Andrew stood rigid beside Ada, his face unreadable. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He was silent for a long moment before responding. "He was different once, before my mother died, or perhaps that's merely a child's selective memory." Ada slipped her arm through his. "Even flawed parents can give us something of value." Andrew looked down at her, his expression softening. "What wisdom did your parents impart?" "My father taught me that knowledge is worthless unless shared," she replied thoughtfully. "And my mother, she showed me that life's greatest pleasures often lie in simple things." She smiled. "Like perfectly baked bread on a winter morning." Andrew drew her close, resting his chin on her head. "Wise indeed. And what shall we teach our child, I wonder? That strength lies not in hiding emotion, but in choosing whom to trust with it," Ada said immediately. "That love is not weakness, but the greatest power we possess." He held her silently for a long moment, then whispered against her hair, "How did I ever deserve you?" "Perhaps you didn't," she teased gently, "but you have me nonetheless." The remainder of spring passed peacefully. Andrew threw himself into preparations for the baby, overseeing the renovation of the nursery suite, with an attention to detail that both amused and touched Ada. He insisted on the safest, most modern equipment, the softest fabrics, the most educational toys, researching each item with the thoroughness he typically applied to estate improvements. "The child won't arrive knowing how to read," Ada pointed out when he presented her with an entire bookcase of children's literature. "Of course not," he replied seriously, "but it's never too early to begin preparation." In June, they traveled to London for the ceremony, establishing Professor Primrose's scholarship. Ada, now in her 8th month, attracted curious glances as Andrew escorted her proudly into the Royal Society's Grand Hall. The coldly proper Duke of Harrington, visibly attentive to his very pregnant wife, provided ample fodder for society gossip. "Let them talk," Andrew murmured when he noticed her awareness of the whispers. "I find I no longer care for others' opinions." The ceremony itself was deeply moving. Distinguished scholars spoke of her father's contributions. Brilliant students expressed gratitude for the opportunity the scholarship would provide. And Andrew, to Ada's surprise, delivered a brief but eloquent speech about the importance of preserving and honoring intellectual legacy. "Your father would have been proud," Eleanor whispered, squeezing Ada's hand as they watched Andrew accept a commemorative plaque. "Of the scholarship, or of his son-in-law?" Ada asked, smiling through tears. "Both, I imagine." Later that evening, as they prepared for bed in their London townhouse, Andrew seemed unusually pensive. "What are you thinking?" Ada asked, brushing her hair at the dressing table. He came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "About legacies. What we leave behind. Your father left knowledge, wisdom, a contribution to human understanding." "And what of your legacy?" she prompted gently. "Until recently, I would have said Harrington itself. The land, the title, the fortune preserved and hopefully increased." He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Now I find those things matter less than I once thought." "What matters more?" His hands moved to rest on her rounded stomach, where their child grew. "This, us, the family we're creating, the love we've found." He smiled ruefully. "Had you told me a year ago that I would speak such words without irony, I would have thought you mad." Ada covered his hands with her own. "And yet, here you are, expressing sentiments that would scandalize the ton." "Here I am," he agreed softly, "transformed by a woman who sees baking as an art form and refuses to be intimidated by dukes." She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Andrew, I need to tell you something." Alarm flashed across his face. "Is it the baby? Are you unwell?" "No, nothing like that," she assured him quickly. "It's just, I've been thinking about names." His relief was palpable. As have I. Family names, of course, are traditional. Andrew for a boy? Perhaps Eleanor for a girl? Ada shook her head. I had something else in mind. She took his hands. If it's a boy, I'd like to name him William, after your cousin who's been such a support to us both. Andrew looked surprised but nodded slowly. William is an excellent name, and if it's a girl, Charlotte, after my dearest friend. She hesitated. With Eleanor as a middle name, of course. William or Charlotte? Andrew tested the names, smiling. Perfect. As they settled into bed, Andrew's arms cradling her protectively, Ada reflected on their extraordinary journey from arranged marriage to genuine partnership. The cold, distant Duke had transformed into an attentive husband, eagerly anticipating fatherhood. And she, who had once valued independence above all else, had discovered the freedom that comes with being truly loved. I never thought I could be this happy, she murmured sleepily. Andrew kissed her temple. Nor I. It seems we've both discovered unexpected joys in our practical arrangement. The most impractical practical arrangement in history, Ada yawned. His soft laughter followed her into dreams. William Andrew Percy entered the world on a stormy July night, after a labor that left both parents exhausted but jubilant. Andrew, who had refused to follow tradition by waiting elsewhere during the birth, held his son with trembling hands, awe and terror mingling on his face. He's so small, he whispered, carefully returning the infant to Ada's arms. But perfect, she replied, studying the tiny features that somehow combined both of them, Andrew's dark hair, her determined chin. Like his mother, Andrew agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The following weeks brought new challenges as they adjusted to parenthood. Andrew, to everyone's surprise, proved to be an engaged father, insisting on participating in his son's care despite the nursemaid's scandalized protests. Your Grace, it simply isn't done, the woman objected when she found him changing the baby's linen one morning. Then we shall establish new precedents at Harrington Hall, he replied firmly. My son will know his father's hands as well as his voice. Ada, watching from the doorway, felt her heart might burst with love for this man who continued to defy her every expectation. As summer waned into autumn, visitors came to meet the Harrington heir. Eleanor and her husband William, delighted with his namesake, Charlotte and her new fiancé, even a few select friends from society. All remarked on the changes in the Duke, how he smiled easily now, how pride in his wife and son radiated from him, how the formidable Ice Duke had melted into a contented family man. By Christmas, William was thriving, already showing signs of his father's intelligence and his mother's determination. The holiday celebration at Harrington Hall, now an annual tradition, filled the once silent halls with music, laughter, and the scent of Ada's special pastries. Late on Christmas Eve, after guests had retired and servants had completed their duties, Andrew and Ada sat alone before the library fire, their sleeping son cradled between them. I have something for you, Andrew said, producing a small package from his pocket. A Christmas gift. Ada unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of William on one side and Andrew on the other. It's beautiful, she whispered, tears threatening. There's more, he said, reaching for a larger package beside his chair, though this required some unusual arrangements. Intrigued, Ada handed William to his father and opened the second gift, a beautifully bound book. The title page read, The Primrose Collection, Favorite Recipes of the Duchess of Harrington. Andrew, she gasped, leafing through pages of her own recipes, beautifully illustrated and printed in a limited edition. How did you— I may have had your recipe journal temporarily borrowed, he admitted, looking pleased with himself. Eleanor helped. Do you like it? It's wonderful. Ada was genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift, acknowledgement of the passion that had first brought them closer. Though I'm not sure a duchess publishing a cookbook is quite proper. Andrew laughed. Propriety be damned. It's a private printing for family and friends. Besides, he added with a mischievous glint in his eye, when has my wife ever concerned herself with being proper? True enough, Ada conceded, leaning over to kiss him. Thank you. As William stirred between them, Ada reflected on the extraordinary year that had passed, from a cold proposal in a ballroom alcove to this moment of domestic tranquility. The Ice Duke had not merely thawed, but transformed, revealing depths of warmth, humor, and tenderness she could never have imagined that first night. "What are you thinking?" Andrew asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About beginnings," she replied, "and how impossible it is to predict where they might lead." He nodded, understanding immediately. "When I proposed our arrangement, I thought I was securing an heir and a suitable hostess. Instead, I found—" He paused, searching for adequate words. "What did you find?" Ada prompted gently. Andrew looked down at their son, then back to her, his eyes full of emotion that once would have been carefully concealed. "Everything," he said simply. "I found everything." 5 years later. The kitchens at Harrington Hall buzzed with activity as Ada supervised the final preparations for their daughter's birthday celebration. 4-year-old Charlotte, born exactly 2 years after her brother, bounced excitedly on her toes, watching as her mother put the finishing touches on a spectacular cake adorned with candied violets. "Is it ready yet, Mama?" she asked for the dozenth time, her dark curls, so like her father's, bouncing with each hop. "Almost, my darling," Ada replied, smiling at her daughter's impatience. "Go tell your father and brother that we'll be ready in 5 minutes." Charlotte scampered off, calling for her father and 6-year-old William at the top of her lungs. Ada shook her head fondly, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. Strong arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned back against her husband's chest. "Our daughter says there's cake to be eaten," Andrew murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though she was speaking so quickly, I only caught every third word. Ada turned in his arms, wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek. "She's excited. I hope I haven't overdone it with the celebration." "Nonsense," Andrew replied as William raced into the kitchen ahead of his sister. "Our children deserve every happiness." Ada looked at her family, her handsome husband now known throughout the county for his warm demeanor and generous spirit, her spirited daughter, her intelligent, kind son, and felt her heart might burst with contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Your practical arrangement that turned so impractical?" Andrew laughed, the sound still a delight to her ears after all these years. "My dearest Ada, the only regret I have is that I began our life together speaking of business rather than love. But perhaps that was necessary. Had I known then how completely you would capture my heart, I might have frightened you with my intensity." "Never," she whispered, stretching up to kiss him, though I admit marry me or face ruin lacked a certain romantic flair. He chuckled against her lips. "How about this instead? Love me, for I cannot exist without you. Be my wife, my heart, my home." "Much better," Ada approved, as Charlotte tugged impatiently at her skirts and William attempted to sample the cake's icing. "Though I rather prefer how our story actually unfolded. The cold duke who demanded marriage until he fell so hard he begged for love, and received it abundantly," Andrew added, gathering his family close. "More than he ever deserved." As they celebrated their daughter's birthday in the warmth of the kitchen that had first brought them together, Ada reflected on life's unexpected turns. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had blossomed into the deepest love, proving that sometimes the sweetest recipes required unexpected ingredients and plenty of patience. For the notorious Ice Duke and the woman who melted his heart, their greatest creation wasn't found in her delicious pastries or his grand estate, but in the family they had built together, a masterpiece of love, trust, and tender devotion that would endure for generations to come. The end. Dear listener, there comes a moment in every life, no matter the years behind us, when we realize that gentleness, not speed, is what carries us safely home. The story you just heard isn't only about a duke and a duchess, it's about us, about how every heart, even one weathered by decades of storms, still holds a quiet ember waiting to glow again. You see, love doesn't always come riding in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives softly, in a shared breakfast, in a steady hand, in the courage to forgive ourselves for all the years we thought were already gone. If your days feel slower now, let them. The slower rhythm of life is not emptiness, it is grace. It's the sound of the world inviting you to rest, to savor, to notice the beauty that rush once made you miss. So tonight, before you close your eyes, remember this. Every breath you take is proof that life hasn't finished speaking to you. There are still mornings waiting to unfold, laughter to be found, memories yet to be written in light. May peace settle gently over your heart tonight. May your dreams be calm, your sleep deep, and your spirit guarded by the quiet certainty that you are still part of something beautiful. With warmth and gratitude, the Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this unforgettable love story. If this tale brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video with someone who still believes in love, even when it begins in the coldest of ways. Your support from the bottom of our hearts helps us stay inspired to continue creating these deeply emotional stories, always with love, healing, and the hope of a second chance. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another one of our most touching stories. Click it and let yourself be moved once again. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.